I have never been the dumbest guy in the room more often than I have at Google. We literally started FedNow with 3 people in technology. It's the first new federal payment system in 50 years. Like, we're processing billions of payments a day.
Dan Anthony, CIO at FedNow. Welcome to Seoul for CIO Boston. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's we've got sunny weather, so I'm really enjoying it.
And we were just chatting before that apparently Boston has famously brutal winters, right? How cold does it get?
-12 or so -7 Celsius, I guess.
And you're from New Zealand, where you never saw that kind of cold, right?
Maybe a frost on the ground.
I don't know when to start. Should we start in New Zealand, or should we start with the FedNow and the Federal Reserve?
Well, sure. Why don't we start with a bit of context about FedNow?
Let's do it. Because I think for a non-American, there's nothing more American than the sound of the Federal Reserve. Like, I don't even quite understand what that is, what that denotes. So maybe explain that for an international audience, and we can flow into FedNow from there, no?
Yeah, and it does actually have a through line to New Zealand, so that works well. The Federal Reserve is an interesting structure. It's comprised of the Board of Governors, which is the only part of the Fed that's actual government, and then 12 districts, which are distributed around the country. So as you can imagine, the economic needs of, say, New York are quite different from the economic needs of the middle of America, which is rural and industrial heartland. So in addition to the districts, we also have these national business lines, which serve functions to the nation. I'm in one of those national business lines, which is the Federal Reserve Financial Services. We operate the nation's payment systems, and we process roughly $5 trillion, give or take, a day. The thing you always think about when you think about the Fed is monetary policy, because that's what gets all the headlines. But when I came here, the sheer breadth of technology that we use is really impressive. And the only reason I knew about the Fed as a technology entity happened to be because I caught a podcast in New Zealand in 2019. So that's how I ended up getting here. To add a little bit of context here, FedNow is national payments infrastructure. Unlike the other payment services like ACH or Wire, or cash or check, it moves money instantly between bank accounts, which other nations have had for a while, but the US has not. And so I heard this podcast, and as a nerd, they were describing the build out of this thing, and I'm like, wow, that's super exciting to work on something completely greenfield, build it from scratch. Every American is going to use it. Like, how often do you get a chance to do that? And I can actually explain what it does to my mother. It has the ability to really tangibly affect the quality of life of some of our most vulnerable citizens. And so every year, just a little bit south of $200 billion is lost in these alternative financial services for the underbanked population. So things like payday loans, check cashing fees, late fees, interest payments. And those things almost all affect the lower and fixed income end of the spectrum, and small businesses. And so if you can give those folks the ability to get paid and to make payments instantly, we can help them avoid even a percentage of that, like a single percentage. We're putting a couple of billion back in the pockets of people who need it the most. And so from a mission perspective, that's what drew me.
I could hear that on a podcast. I wouldn't be running the FedNow, I'm sure. Maybe a place to begin as we talk about FedNow is maybe to analyze why the US in particular is a little slow in its adoption of that kind of technology or that kind of processes in the first place, because I'm sure that'll give some context to the challenges you face in implementing something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have unique experience perspective on that as a New Zealander. So New Zealand has about 27 banks, and about half of those are holding entities. I'm going from memory here, but that's about right. The UK, I think, has south of 100 banks. The US has just under 10,000. And so every time you want to do something in the financial system,
right,
that's a lot of ships.
A lot of banks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those banks are very diverse, from sort of small $50 million of assets under management through to, tens of billions of dollars under management. We started, industry made it clear they wanted a federally operated payment service, instant payment service. We published a Federal Register notice or a FERN, solicited feedback, got great feedback on what they wanted to do. We evaluated a bunch of different products to figure out, were there any that met our needs and that were a good fit, and eventually decided, no, we had to build this. And that's, the unique combination of servicing 10,000 banks, which, literally no one else in the world does, 24/7, 365 uptime, high transaction volume, but importantly, settling every transaction in real time against the master account. It's not netting them out and batching them up every 30 seconds or so.
Imagine, I can't fathom the complexity of that kind of construction. I mean, where put it into as tangible a terms as you can in terms of what the challenge looked like and how you started to navigate through that.
It's the first new federal payment system in 50 years. Most payment rails run on a traditional, active, you run in two data centers kind of context. Um, with FedNow, because we're in the cloud and, because we had the advantage of sort of building it from the grassroots up, we picked up techniques, technologies, processes, and models from big tech, from media, from entertainment, from telco, from healthcare. We kind of brought in a ton of talent. We literally started FedNow with 3 people in technology. So everything was new, including the model of how do you run some of these systems. Take a Google, for example. They run distributed systems, are great at it. And we took a lot of lessons from them. The thing that is different is we're supporting the payments infrastructure for the nation. And by supporting the payments infrastructure for the US economy, we effectively support infrastructure for the rest of the world because of the interconnectedness. And that's a different burden. So we have to approach with security, with resiliency, with reliability, front and center.
I can imagine it did. I guess talking about a balance of agility and conservatism, you're trying to navigate those two bulwarks. How did you make sure you were able to push forward without compromising this hugely demanding stakes?
We announced in 2019 that we were going to launch FedNow in 2023 or 2024. And, we were not going to miss that date. We had a very focused approach on governance and oversight. So, how do we streamline that? How do we make sure that the right scrutiny is being applied to the right decisions? We could quickly try something, validate the concept, and then move forward with production. We didn't have to get sort of 6 months down, then start a QA cycle, then realize we had a bunch of problems and had to go back to work. It was very quick and iterative. We also took the same approach with our customers. We had the FedNow community, which was north of 1,200 participants. And then we had around 300 in our beta group. And those things brought early feedback in. And so the traditional path of doing a bunch of remediation at the back end of delivery, we didn't really have to deal with that because we were adjusting to feedback and real-time insight. Everything is automated. There's no humans in the mix. So you can immediately tell if something's going wrong. We have security baked into the application from the developer's desktop through to deployment into production and being live. So it's all about putting in those guardrails. Now, in a traditional world, those guardrails would be bureaucracy. In a new world, we've kind of automated that bureaucracy in as technology, and the technology takes care of that for us. Technology fails, right? Networks break, a switch collapses. We're designed with resilience and redundancy to support around that in exactly the same way that cloud providers themselves are.
What was the security dimension like to approach?
So I can't talk too much about it for obvious reasons, but
As far as you're able.
one of the advantages I think here for us is because we are running in the cloud, you can rely on the cloud provider to secure the underlying infrastructure, right? The bits and bytes, the metal. I don't have to worry about patching my operating system or getting the latest BIOS update or anything like that. That's taken care of for me. I can concentrate on creating the hardest, most secure exterior around the application. And that gives me tremendous ability to focus on higher value security activities rather than needing sort of an army of people going around patching servers and things like that every day.
How successful was the launch overall, and how quickly were you able to scale to that point where it was the nation's infrastructure, from testing to it's live, it's being used trillions of times a day?
So we're still working through that. Our volume is growing double and triple digit, quarter on quarter on quarter. I want to say we've had 645% growth in volume over the last year. And our value is growing quarter on quarter. As we get to ubiquity, and every American citizen and every business has access to instant payments, I think what we'll probably see is you'll see a higher volume of lower value payments. So both will go up. The dynamic will shift a little bit. Participation has been incredible. The uptake has been huge, and the usage of the system is growing enormously. Like we're processing billions of payments a day. I think one of the key things to make it easy to access is we invested really heavily in a streamlined automated onboarding experience. So our record from putting a digital link on a virtual contract to live is 7 days. And if you've ever worked with banks before, that's insanely fast.
What's been the most satisfying thing about the launch to date? I know you talked about that mission statement and that opportunity to make an impact to people, but where do you get that in? Where are you able to gauge that impact? How are you able to measure it?
About 2 weeks after we launched, the first treasury payment came through, and it was getting a veteran their backlog of veterans benefits. And then a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we were doing FEMA disbursements for Treasury Digital Pay. And so almost immediately, we saw FEMA payments start to come through. We recently onboarded a large bank, and by recently, I mean 2 days ago. First day they were on board, they got a FEMA payment. Like that's getting money to people in their darkest moments when they need it the most. Like as a nerd, you don't often get to do stuff like that. So like I can't tell you how cool that is. And as a team, we kind of celebrate those things. We launched with a $500,000 maximum transaction limit. We increased to $1 million, and immediately saw people using the $1 million transaction limits. We've just announced an increase to $10 million, which will enable, and that's possible because we've delivered additional control and risk management features. Your average citizen isn't moving $10 million payments, but the banks that service those citizens want to. And so when they're able to move those kind of payments, they'll access the system, and we get closer to our goal of instant payments ubiquity for every American. So these are the kind of wins that really land for me, as well as seeing just the steady rise in use of the system. Like that tells me we're doing something that the nation sort of wants and needs.
There's quite a few emerging technologies in the mix at the moment. AI, quantum computing, they all have implications, like in terms of threat and in terms of opportunity for a sector like this. Let's start with the threat element. Well, when you look across the landscape of all of this change in current digital transformation and AI-driven digital transformation, what stands out to you as something to be concerned about and to safeguard against, first of all?
AI is one of those interesting things where I think it has sort of unknown upside and undefined risk. The challenge with AI, I think, and that we still have to wrap our arms around as an industry, is it is by nature non-deterministic. OpenAI themselves, one of their researchers just wrote a paper essentially stating, amongst other things, that hallucinations were mathematically impossible to prevent. They're always going to be there. When we start to talk about agentic AI, that's a different type of risk in Dan's opinion. And this complete answer is not the Fed opinion. This is my opinion. We trust agents today because they are deterministic. They're programmed. You know how they're going to behave. You can test it. But you can see for yourself, right? You ask an AI chatbot a question, you can ask it the same question a couple of times and you'll get a different answer. Imagine these agents behaving non-deterministically, taking action on your behalf. I think that's a risk that we have yet to figure out how to manage successfully. Now, there's enormous potential in doing agentic AI. You can see a lot of it in code development, for example, for building applications. I strongly suspect what we will see is a significant stumble that will have impact to a business, and then we'll see a strong practice grow up around AI governance and risk management. You're starting to see it now, but I think once something like that, something big goes boom, there's going to be financial incentive to invest in those skill sets. And I think you'll see some of the big consultancies invest there as well. That, I think, is the biggest set of risks around AI. Everything else has been sort of largely established. The return on investment is hard to quantify and realize right now. You're seeing some significant proportion of AI investments get rolled back. You're seeing some high-profile cases where organizations have said they're going to lay people off because of AI, and then had to walk that back when they realized the benefits weren't there. So I think we've just got to figure some of this stuff out, and then what is the right business case? What is the risk profile? How do we control for that? How much of their own autonomy do we want to actually give agents? It's very different, I think, to have a agentic AI that makes a recommendation to you based on what it sees versus one that's empowered to go off and take action. Every service provider has AI in there somewhere, but one of the prevailing use cases there seems to be around facilitating workflow and fraud management and fraud detection and prevention. I think there's likely to be significant upside there.
Soul of the CIO is sponsored by Nexthink. Now, if you work in IT, you'll know too well how disruptions can derail productivity fast. Nexthink's AI-powered platform for digital employee experience keeps you ahead. It uncovers issues others can't see and resolves them automatically with employee-centric AI and always-on automation. Employees stay productive, IT stays proactive and even preventative, and leadership sees results. Nexthink, ahead of every IT disruption, behind every strategy. Learn more at nexthink.com. Where do the opportunities stand out for you in the sector, and what excites you about the coming years?
I do legitimately think there's enormous opportunity in AI. I don't think it would be fair to say we're at the fastest moving time in history. Like there was a 70-year block towards, 100 years or so ago where, we went from everything being done manually to electrical powered factories, through to everyone having electric lights, through to cars, completely revolutionizing transportation. Like in that same period, I went from, it took me 17 minutes to get here to have this discussion. Within that period, it would have taken me about a day each way. And that changed within 10 years. And so if you think about the disruption to the industrial processes and just everyone's lives that happened when electricity came up, when cars came up, when roads came up, I think we're going to see similar disruption now. Now, that didn't mean mass layoffs and everyone sort of suddenly unemployed forever, but it does mean jobs changed. It does mean how we deliver things change. Quantum is very much not an opportunity, I think, unless you're a consultancy going to make a lot of money helping companies remediate. What will be interesting is how some of these technologies converge. So does AI help with quantum, help it develop faster or not? Quantum's going to be good for some things and not others. Are we going to, what does the hype cycle for quantum technologies look like? And then I think as we have these sort of new discoveries emerging, what's next? Like, how are we going to adjust for that? And how do we build organizations that are able to learn and adapt? Like that I think is the defining challenge for our age is we're very thoughtful about how we apply technologies. And if you think about all the risks I just talked about with AI and running the nation's payment systems, those two things are pretty incompatible. So we want to be really thoughtful about that.
When you think about your future as a CIO, as a technology leader, from overseeing this just gargantuan and complex transformation process, what are the key lessons that you've taken from that you think will carry into whatever future challenges you have in your career?
And I came into FedNow in 2019 and I saw this 2023, 24 date and I'm like, why is it going to take so long? And then you realize it's a payment system and it's dealing with other payment systems. Oh, and every American is going to be putting money over it eventually. You have to be a lot more careful with that than you do with, say, looking up a flight. My flawed assumptions about the industry, and it wasn't until I started doing FedNow that I appreciated the scale of the US financial system. So growth mindset's key, and I think every CIO should have one. We need to stop viewing ourselves as a partner to the business or a supporter to the business. There's not really any businesses today that are not fundamentally technology businesses now. Someone said to me a few months back, and it completely got me rethinking about this. You're not really a technology executive. You're a business executive who happens to be a technologist. If CIOs collectively reframed how we think about ourselves in that way, we'll deliver much more value to the business. Like, we shouldn't be helping the business succeed. We should be part of the strategy and an integral part of driving those outcomes forward. The other thing I would say is, to our earlier discussion, take measured risks. The successes I've been able to have in my career have been because I've been able to take risks. And my personal risk appetite is relatively large. So
Would have to be, I think.
yeah. And maybe I'll rephrase that about risks as get used to being uncomfortable. Like if you're doing things that are making that you are comfortable doing, you're probably not maximizing your growth and ability to have impact.
You mentioned how, Google opens, your time at Google opened doors. What did your time at Google kind of give you in terms of lessons and learnings that expanded your horizons? I mean, what was that experience like in general, and what were the big takeaways from it?
I have never been the dumbest guy in the room more often than I have at Google. Like as a technologist, you get into Google and I think the same is true as at Amazon or Microsoft. And it's like, oh, I'm in a candy store. I want some of that. I want some of this, and I want to play with that. And you have to figure out what you want to learn, be receptive to coaching and feedback and sort of take that on. Now, the other side is I think it did teach me to appreciate my unique experiences. Google has amazing technologists. They will write an algorithm that will stun you, which is not my core capability at all. But they don't necessarily think how an enterprise thinks. And so I was talking to one of the software engineers, actually one of the guys who worked on Wave, about an enterprise concern and, something that companies were dealing with. And he just kind of stared at me blankly and just didn't get it. It's because they think about different things. They think about infrastructure, they think about scale, and the nature of the business is different. I think you're starting to see changes in that perspective as they particularly as their cloud business is growing. The key insight for me going in there was, look, I got a lot to learn, but I also have a lot to offer. And I think that's true of everyone in whatever role you go into. Me going to Google was not a given. When they tried to recruit me, I didn't really want to do it because I was pretty comfortable doing consulting and learning all the stuff there. And so I thought, this is something different. It's a risk. Just back yourself. And it ended up being one of the best career moves I could have made. But it was eye-opening. At a technical level, I think the most useful things I've gotten out of my time at Google is understanding scale, understanding resilience, understanding operational processes in ways that typical organizations don't have.
What do the next 2-3 years look like? What are the biggest milestones you're anticipating? What are some of the challenges you're excited about navigating at the moment?
The fun part about FedNow, I mentioned the launch was collaborative. I get to go out and talk to our banks and our customers and our credit unions and the processors. So hearing firsthand what problems they want to solve, that will inform our roadmap. So as we've built FedNow to be responsive to industry needs, the roadmap is responsive to industry needs. When we flip the switch on going to the $10 million payments, that will be huge. I think you can reasonably expect us to continue to invest in safety and resiliency needs. Quantum is not too far down the track. We've got that to deal with. We launched APIs, I want to say about 6 months ago, and we've added a couple more since. We'll continue to roll those out. So the roadmap, I think, is rich, and it's going to be very responsive to what we hear from customers. What's exciting, though, is this is essentially a brand new capability for the US. Once US gets ubiquitous instant payments, we will see it used in tremendous ways that we never expected. And I think, as we start to see those use cases, that'll tell us what we need to build. And so, I mentioned we do have a very clear product roadmap, but as a technologist, standing at the brink of the unknown, like what innovations are Americans going to do when they get access to instant payments? I can already see businesses reorchestrating supply chain to optimize order to cash. I think we're going to see all kinds of use cases, particularly as the third-party ecosystem catalyzes around that. And so for me, this roadmap of stuff that's going to come to me that we'll get to deliver, even not knowing what it is, but knowing that it's there and it's coming, that's hugely exciting.
Dan, Anthony, thank you so much for sharing that with us on the show. And I don't always say this at the end of an interview, but congratulations, man. It's been an amazing achievement for the last few years. It's really impressive.
We have a great team. I would stack our technology team up against any technology team I've worked with.
Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.